Thank you for joining the first of our project meetings to discuss the TC80. I suppose the other person who we are that will join us is Keith Bryans.
Right.
Keith, I think, has done some work on this in the past. As you all know, we've got several different initiatives within the EDC for this year, and I'm going to take the lead on this project, which is to look at what opportunities we think there is to improve the TC80, and whether that means increasing the grand list or making it more beautiful or making it more welcoming. The purpose of this meeting is basically to sort of create a framework that we'd like to have this project managed under, and where we'll commit to certain action steps and try to put dates around how we would manage this project over the next 12 months. And I noticed, so I sent out in the agenda the project charter. So my goal is, and we're not going to do it in the meeting, but my goal from this meeting is I can basically fill in all of these boxes, send it back out to you. We can make a few revisions and have, you know, a document that we're all pretty happy with as a subcommittee for next week's meeting. And like the first one is the mission statement. I don't know whether we want to try to do the mission statement now, or whether we sort of come back to it after we sort of talk about what are the goals and objectives, and then maybe we back into the mission statement. So I propose that we sort of go to we sort of talk about what we think the goals and objectives are of this project. And actually, before we do that, is everyone familiar with the area that we're talking about? So the area around exit 90, a relatively small area. There's not a huge number of properties or property owners, maybe 20 or 25 in total. But any questions on the location of TC80? Nope. And okay, so let's maybe I'll start, and maybe we'll go around the call for everyone to sort of put in their 2 cents of what they think the goals and objectives should be. And I'm going to make it simple. So I've got 2. So one is I would like to see if we can increase, and when I say increase, I'd like to say, you know, could we increase the grand list in this area by 50% over the next 10 years? And my second one is I would like to see if we could actually make this an entrance to and a welcoming point to Stonington. So when people arrive, and this is obviously one of the key exits, you know, if you've been on 95 and you've come from New York or you've come from Boston, it's you know, you come off exit 90, it's like, okay, well, I've just come into some place which looks like every other place in the Northeast. How do we make it feel like, oh my God, I finally arrived at the place I wanted to arrive at, and there's this beautiful river, or there's this beautiful welcoming fountain or plants or trees or sign to say, welcome to Stonington. And we sort of announce ourselves to everybody who's getting off the exit at 90, and makes them feel like they have arrived at the destination that they were heading to, and maybe hopefully then encourage them to maybe stay longer than they were going to stay, and things like that. And maybe part of that is also signage and wayfinding, where I think the initial, when they drew up that exit a long time ago, I think there were some thoughts that maybe a lot more of the traffic could be directed to go straight ahead and come around into the aquarium, or come around into the maybe now what we'd call Hartford Health. I think the vast majority of traffic probably turns right and then goes down Route 27. But there's potentially some opportunity to have the traffic flows be a bit more logical based on the signage as you're coming off exit 90. So they're 2 very long-winded goals which I'd sort of like to put out there. So Dave, do you want to go next on what you'd like to see?
Sure, thanks. Took me a second to unmute. So I would like us to be able to create a vision And one potential vision would be transitioning into a lifestyle neighborhood. And by that, I mean we would have not only the short-term residents who stay in the hotels, which are many, but also permanent residents by virtue of apartments and multifamily housing. It's the Old Mystic Village area is already morphing into more of a lifestyle center. The theater is fantastic, and there's some very popular restaurants and nightlife developing there. I feel like having permanent residents along with the short-term residents and opening up to the river offers tremendous opportunity to add a public amenity and lifestyle attributes to this, neighborhood. Certainly with McQuaid's as shopping, elder care, and in the area in several facilities, as well as the Hartford Healthcare, there's all kinds of services to support more residential growth in this area. I feel like Stone can support as a town, we could gain public support for this type of development because it's low impact to the village of Mystic. So I kind of would like to see, developing kind of a long-range conceptual plan or vision or sort of a quasi-master plan for this area, and then begin to socialize that with the community so that we can gain some community support, and then start to lay some plans for how we might actually, working with folks, property owners to how we might realize the vision.
Thanks, Dave. So I'm going to go around the way everyone's laid out on my screen. So Bill Middleton, you're next.
Okay, just to sort of build on that, I have a lot of thoughts because I spent some chunk of my life at Exit 90 for better or worse. And I think you guys are definitely on the right track. In terms of the ability to expand the grand list, the most with the smallest impact to the town, I think this is definitely the best opportunity. I mean, you can get people in and out of there without virtually any impact to town. The infrastructure is already there. So there's, I think, an enormous opportunity for that. And a lot of these properties have been undermanaged, frankly, for years. I mean, there's some pretty down market property there. Some of those hotels are pretty aged and beaten. A lot of them, I think, have been built in the 60s with, they're almost as old as I am, for heaven's sakes. I think there's also a sort of easy opportunity, sort of aesthetically. I think we want to get people out of their cars and moving around. To Dave's point, I think you want to make it more of a lifestyle place, which, has sort of happened. I've seen it with our places. We get a lot of locals who normally would never have gone to the Exit 90 area, more than 5 years ago. So you certainly see between restaurants, the theater, the McQuaid's are already going there. So you've got that ability to integrate it into the community. So I think we want to, if you can, as part of that, make it much more pedestrian friendly and much more aesthetically pleasing. I mean, there's, I think, 5 maybe hotels north of 95 there. And, for them to walk down to the village or walk anywhere else, when you walk into that underpass, it's got the grand experience of the Cross Bronx Expressway. There's a lot of improvement to be done there that you see in other parts of the state. I mean, Fairfield County overpasses, even Old Lyme, if you go down there, the overpasses are much more aesthetically pleasing. This is not really at Exit 90, but you have the scenic overlook on 995 that looks down toward the seaport, and you're looking through and over a chain link fence. That's a pretty easy opportunity to improve that experience. And it just sort of seems like we all go day to day past this stuff and never really think about it. I think there's also a real opportunity to do pedestrian, running, biking, walking, whatever, that whole exit 90 loop. It's almost exactly 2 miles. And you could really, without a lot of, I don't think, infrastructure change, really make that much more pedestrian friendly and a great amenity locally. I know in the past we've had meetings that have talked about Coogan Boulevard that is really sort of wildly overbuilt. It's this 4-lane, practically a highway that people speed up and down, really bad visibility. There's a great chance, I think, to sort of narrow that down and make bike and walking much more pedestrian friendly on either side as well. In terms of river access too, which I think has been kicked around for a long time in terms of the great challenge of getting people from exit 90 into downtown, without cars, as we've seen back all the way up Route 27 to exit 90 and back the other way. Probably your greatest opportunity to do that is via the cemetery. They've got this several 100-foot wide, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit there, swath of greenery that goes right down to the river, completely unused, and would make a great public access for the river there. Just sort of some other thoughts looking, not really spent any time until you sent this looking at the zoning map there. And some of it's a little curious. I mean, the M1 manufacturing zone dropped in the middle of a tourist commercial area and overlaid on some wetlands is a little curious at best. And I think there's some real opportunity for some zone change here to sort of rationalize some of this. I think that's probably my initial beating to death of the topic.
Thanks, Bill. I don't know whether anybody's going to be able to have any more ideas after that, but I've written them all down. So Sherry, you're next on my screen. So
hello, everyone. I'm Sherry Cody, and I am new to the staff at Sector. You're probably familiar with the Southeastern Connecticut Enterprise Region, and we work closely with our municipalities. So Dave has invited me here today to see how we can support your efforts with this project or projects. I don't have any other ideas for that area, but one of the things that I mentioned to Dave the other day was just thinking about short-term and long-term, and maybe doing the wayfinding signs that you talked about as a short-term win, while you focus on some of those other things long-term. Just my 2 cents, but I love hearing your ideas, and we're here to support you in however we can.
Great, thank you very much, Sherry. Dan.
Hi, yeah. I think I'm going to cover mostly ground that's already been covered, but I agree with Dave. I think we should try to come up with a recommendation for what residential mix should be for this area. I certainly like, the lifestyle descriptive word I think is good, but I think at the end of this, we should have a recommendation of what we think would be good for that. I'm also a big fan of turning this into the gateway to Stonington and the gateway to Mystic. We've all talked about it a number of times, but I think that needs to be worked into the ambition here. And I also, I don't really know how we'd address this in zoning, but I think it is a concern with how it does connect with downtown, and not just they walk by the seaport or drive by the seaport and get downtown, but that they, these two nodes of our town are working together. And I think it'd be great if people could park their car up there and take a trolley to downtown or vice versa. Very expensive. I know that was looked at a number of years ago. But anyway, we can facilitate a better connection between the two, I think would be something we should look at. And I think that's about all I've got.
Great, thanks, Dan. John.
Hopefully there's no echo. Obviously, increase the grant list is always a key important thing from my perspective. So I'm going to echo what a lot of people have already said. I look at exit 90 as if, first of all, I run around exit 90 a lot, and I take my life in my own hands when I run down there. You have a lot of opportunity to have trails or paths in that area that could link up to active DPNY trails. People are walking, people are running, people are using their bikes. That area has the ability. I mean, you could have a 1 mile walking trail around Mystic Village, Old Mystic Village. But I think going back to what you said, Kevin, and to some extent what Bill said, there's very little curb appeal or really an upscale image when you get off of 90, whether you're going north or south. And as I see people in this town, there's a lot of Mass plates, there's tons of Rhode Island plates, a lot of New Jersey, a lot of New York. The reality is when you come off both sides of the exit, there's nothing to get you excited and embraced about the community, even though a lot of people come here for tourist reasons, they know it's there. So I look at, I think it was reconfiguring the exit ramps, getting better signage, bringing the brand up that Stonington has to offer as one of the premier tourist destinations within the state. That's what we are. And that's what I grew up living in Rhode Island, always wanting to come to Mystic as a tourist destination. As far as development, there are a lot of properties within the CC80 zone that are what I would deem tired, and Bill alluded to it. So you got limited service hotels that candidly, I don't know how utilized they are. I know one isn't utilized at all because I never see cars there. So you have the ability to put more Hyatt type Hyatt. I look at the hotels of Hilton, Hyatt, Holiday Inn Express, and you have a Residence Inn. Beyond that, they're all limited to down service. If you want to make it a tourist destination, you want to have better brands to serve a better tourist group. So I know that sounds a little harsh, but that's the reality. But there's a lot of stuff that you can do with those properties beyond hospitality. And it could be residential if that's the way we want to go. But I would say curb appeal, image, really bringing it up, maybe not Walt Disney World quality, but upscale it to embrace the people who come and visit the town. And candidly, I go to Old Mystic Village a lot for the restaurants, for the retail shops. But I've only lived here full time for 15 months. So I've seen the benefit of improving Old Mystic Village as a destination point in addition to the aquarium and the seaport. So I don't want to say I echo what everyone has said, but to some extent, that's what I'm saying.
So I always got a number of great snippets from Jason Vincent, may he rest in peace. And one of them was, at best, this is a bronze triangle. It is definitely not the golden triangle. Maybe in the 70s it was a golden triangle, but yeah, I think that it looks, that most of those properties look fairly sad, with the exception of Mystic Village, where I think Chris has done a pretty good job at making it feel New England, and it's like it's low key. But that doesn't mean we couldn't do a whole stack of radical things around it, as far as new buildings and 5 or 6 story buildings up next to the highway. Who knows? Okay, Pete Robinson.
I feel compelled after that to present the contrarian review. Maybe it looks too good, exit 90, maybe it's too upscale. So no, I echo everything. Especially, it's interesting to hear, we all kind of get used to seeing what it is, but looking at it with fresh eyes, it's very difficult. I can't think of another place in town that has more potential to be an integrated spot for many different things. And no one's going to complain about making that area look. I mean, this is a pretty easy sell. It's just going to be a matter of tying in a vision. I do think it's tying some monetary things in with it is a good idea, Kevin. Having some monetary goal to serve as the driver in a grand list would certainly be helpful. But nothing. I really have nothing new to add there. I agree with everyone's saying.
Thanks, Pete. I notice Lisa has joined us as well. Lisa, what we're doing is we're just going around everybody who's on the call for them to put in their 2 cents on what types of improvements or things we could be looking at in the exit 90 TC 80 range. So I'm not too sure whether you've had much of an opportunity to think about it, but if you've got any thoughts you'd like to share, then that would be great.
Hi, everyone. This is actually Maria. I've gotten Lisa onto the call. She had to just step away just for a moment. She'll be right back.
Okay.
Thank you.
So what we'll do while we're waiting for Lisa to come is I actually think this is actually fairly easy. So we had a lot of different points and specific points, but I can sort of feel already that this is going to, we could summarize these in about 5 different areas. So let me take a stab at that. So the first thing I heard, or one of the categories, and I've got to figure out what the right wording is, but it's around how do people get around. So whether we talked about making it more pedestrian friendly, bike paths, John, you running. We want to get from exit 90 to downtown and back. So what would be a good phrase that we could use to sort of have one goal around looking at what are all these options for making this a more walkable, livable, runnable, and public transport, whether it's by water or by walking.
I think the word you might want, multiple words, is active lifestyle is usually what a lot of people use for that. And oftentimes that also ties into new residential, because new residential often ties into active lifestyle communities.
Right. So what I'm going to do is, so unless someone's got a better suggestion, what I'll do is I'll group all of these things which are around walking, biking, getting from whether it's on the river down to downtown Mystic is one of the things which we want to look at and look at what the options are. Bill, I didn't realize that there was actually a space in the cemetery. So that's one of the things which always put me off. I thought, oh God, if we had to build something out onto the river that bypasses the cemetery, that's getting really expensive. You got DEP. But if we could, agree something with the cemetery to say, can we get an entrance point somewhere? The cemetery is actually quite a nice place to walk through. And it brings you all the way to the seaport almost. And then obviously at some point before that, we'd have the Mystic Boathouse. So there's, there could be quite a lot of public access there.
And if you look at that, if you look at the cemetery, that whole part to the north, that borders with Friendlies, that's all undeveloped. If that's what you call graves, it's development. But there's nothing there for a pretty wide, it's just a green space, basically straight down to the river from Route 27. And I don't think they have any plans necessarily to start using that anytime soon.
Okay. I think one clear one which stands by itself is Dave's idea of we should have a strategic vision. And that vision probably encompasses all of these different things we're talking about. But I think maybe it's something that we should maybe that should be one of the first things we do, because once we sort of agree at a high level of, in 10 years or 15 years time, what do we want this area to look like, then maybe we should focus on that long-term, lifestyle vision. And from that, it'll then, I think, bring out a lot of these other ideas which we're talking about. So I would put that as a separate topic. And Sherry, I think your idea of short-term and long-term is good, but I think we do the long-term vision first, and then we say, okay, within all of these things, some of them we may actually be able to do in the next 12 months. How do we go about doing those? So I think that works. So I'm going to put the vision as a separate goal and objective.
Hey, Kevin, the term for that first bucket that you talked about could be the term mobility, which is used a lot. So mobility would capture everything we talked about.
And just sort of on that, I think we tend to go to, there's this perception that from exit 90 to downtown is really far.
Yeah, right.
The reality of it is a 20-minute walk. And I think there's probably a lot to be done fairly easily just communicating that it's really not a terribly far walk.
Right.
which is a wayfinding thing. And that's, Bill, you probably heard the story of, was it Jason or someone else? So people got off exit 90, they went to Old Mystic Village and then left. Or maybe it's in Bill Bryson's book. And he said, oh, Mystic wasn't really something, but wasn't much to talk about. But they never went to downtown Mystic. Right. Because there's no signs which says, by the way, there's a historic downtown area, a mile down the, a couple of miles down the road. Okay. Then another theme which I heard was, I call it beautification, but it's really aesthetic. I think there's a lot of opportunity, whether it's on the underpasses and the Connecticut, the Yukon landscape architecture kids did some exciting drawings, and I think maybe it'd be good if we could either use something like that or do something for this where we could say here's some things which this exit could look like, which will make it look more appealing. And I think part of I'm trying to say that part of the aesthetics does the creating a boulevard, is that part of it? I think it probably is. So I think we can lump then beautification as well as the movement of traffic flows and the slowing down of traffic, so it becomes more pedestrian friendly as one topic. So I'm going to call that aesthetic improvements, and I might throw wayfinding in there as well. Well, actually, interestingly, when I look at all the other things which we talked about, so we talked about, river access, leveraging the cemetery, short-term, long-term, link between downtown and exit 90, trails. I suppose one thing is branding. Maybe I'm wondering if maybe I think maybe we should separate the aesthetic improvements from things like Coogan Boulevard and improvements to traffic flows and direction.
So
yeah,
Kevin,
go ahead.
We didn't really talk about it per se, and it's a little bit more in the process end of things. So we're talking more visioning, but in order to kind of get our hands around it, we start talking about analyses and that we want to do as this group. I mean, a current state and future state being the vision, but the current state would be like, taking an inventory of what's there now. And, we have some of the defunct, forlorn hotels and some of the nicer ones. And then we have all the amenities that are kind of on the up and up, some of the restaurants and some of the retail establishments are doing really well, and the theater and stuff like that. But then we have some that maybe could use some help. So just doing a current state analysis and then being able to map that to the future state would be something we'd want to include on our to-do list.
Yeah, I agree. Now, where do you think we should be putting in changing the zoning to allow for residential? I think it's going to come out of the active lifestyle. The strategic plan. But do we need a separate idea around what are the zoning changes which we'd like to see or we'd want to have made in order to sort of make sure this vision that we come up with can happen?
That'll be a good one to follow up with Keith on, and too bad he wasn't able to join, but being the the guru for the regulations would be helpful to have his input on that. And because Chris Reagan did go to and got a change in TC 80 to allow for the height. He got a density exception, and now I can't actually remember, because he and I had talked about, instead of a hotel, having it be residential, and I can't honestly remember what would have to happen for that. But I can look that up and get back to this group if that would be helpful.
If I could jump into looking at the regs, home occupation is allowed as an accessory use in TCA.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't even realize it was allowed as an accessory use. So the question is, do we want to have a specific goal? Because then or are we getting ahead of ourselves to say that we think that we should allow multi-unit residential and basically have a much higher height allowed? I mean, the fact that many of those hotels are 2 stories makes no sense. And why couldn't you have 5-story buildings which are very attractive, which have got, there's this river that none of those buildings look out on?
That's, if I could kind of jump in there a little bit, one of the challenges you have is so many of those properties, because of their age, and some of them were built before there was in fact zoning and zoning, are pre-existing non-conforming. And under the current regs, you can do virtually nothing with them without essentially starting all over again. You in some cases are better off just knocking everything down from a zoning perspective and building a fast food restaurant than trying to do anything with what's existing. So I would think you would want to try to, to the extent possible, encourage a readaptive use of what's there. So I think that's one thing to address is this, the setbacks are pretty stringent. Those have increased a lot over the years. Maybe just reviewing the setbacks might be part of it. The density, building heights, all of those things, and maybe just sort of a general loosening up. For example, I don't think breweries and distilleries are allowed in the TC80, which probably seems like the kind of thing you might want to have in that TC80, for example. So I think it probably bears some effort to go through and maybe look at some of those restrictions that have been placed on it.
Right.
Okay, thanks. Lisa, I just wanted to check whether you have joined us or not.
Yes, I'm here listening in. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I don't know whether we sort of went around everybody on the call for them to put in their 2 cents worth on what improvements or opportunities they think might exist in the exit 90 area. So if you've got any thoughts that you'd like to share with the group.
Well, I'm sorry I wasn't able to join at the start of the meeting, coming in from something previously, and I don't want to be redundant. And at the same time, absolutely, I've got a few just general thoughts. Having attended that straw man session that was held in the village a few months ago, led by Jason Vincent, which I think really brought some good ideas, to the forefront through that process. But specifically at the Gateway, I think some beautification, as you say, Kevin, efforts are needed, whether it's a physical structure or something that lets people know that they arrived above and beyond the fence with the banner at Old Mystic Village. I don't know if it's something else. And certainly carrying a look that's consistent from Old Mystic Village all the way through the downtown. So it's not this disjointed appearance. When I think about our downtown Westerly Pawcatuck, the flower pots are the same, the banners are the same, the garbage, we go to great extent to try to match all the physical attributes of the 2 states and 2 towns so that the visitor experience is such that it's a cohesive unit. And I think that's one of the things that you absolutely need for downtown Mystic and Old Mystic Village to close that psychological gap. As Bill Middleton was referring to, it's not a far walk. It really isn't. And that would help if you had not just the beautification, but the signage that all was coordinated, and it would make that whole geographic area feel smaller and feel more connected. I think someday it would be great if the Mystic Chamber could get its location permanently at that exit in a very visible way, you know, kind of like where Friendly's is or something. So you come off the exit and boom, you have an attractive visitor center that can make sure that the guest experience is such that they understand there's a separate downtown above and beyond the experience they're going to have at Old Mystic Village, and they can get their maps and brochures and what events are happening, and also learn about Stonington Borough and the other villages within the town like Pawcatuck and Stonington Borough that are worth you know, checking out, and the Velvet Mill. So I think ideally that would be a great place for a state-of-the-art visitor center for that community, as opposed to the small one that's tucked in the village itself, or the new one being established by the chamber downtown upstairs in the back room of a plumbing business.
Yeah, I like the idea of a visitor center just off the exit there. Great, and I think that can all fit under the aesthetic improvement gateway branding project.
Yep. And then in terms of the you know, the residential, I think that's key, particularly for Old Mystic Village. If we can really look at that, and the same way that Pawcatuck was looked at, where some of the setbacks were drastically changed, some of the density requirements for that specific village were changed, and allowed some structures to get in there where the village isn't just a commercial village, but it's truly a living village, kind of like in Cranston, Rhode Island, where you have some beautiful homes, and those people that live right near and in that village, they can all walk there on a day-to-day basis and support the commercial establishments there.
Yeah,
that's just sort of initial thoughts. Obviously,
right.
You know, access to the river and all that. And I know someone probably said trolley because trolley always comes up, but funding a trolley is, you know, no small feat. But, you know, having a circulator to connect the two for those who refuse to walk or don't want to ride a bike, those are all nice things that visitors like to have and see.
Great, thanks, Lisa. So what I was thinking is, I think that the strategic vision is important, and maybe we shouldn't jump ahead of ourselves when we think about if we want to have community meetings and get buy-in for a vision. Part of that vision would include, oh, we think that people should be able to live there. So I'm inclined to think that rather than us second guess what we would like to be part of this now, which is, you know, residential use, I think we should maybe focus on a vision which would basically imply that we'd have people living and working and walking in that area. Then we'd have some like a community meeting or a way of getting those thoughts out. I think, as Pete said, I don't think that this is like particularly controversial, because we don't already have an established neighborhood where people don't want to see change. The fact that it's on the sewer line for Mystic, the infrastructure is all pretty much in place, then I think we're probably, you know, in a pretty good position, providing we sort of think about it thoughtfully, include people, go step by step, and then maybe we end up where we wanted to end up. But maybe as one of the goals here, we don't say, let's go and figure out what's wrong with the current zoning regulations and make all the changes. And what we do first is we come up with a strategic vision, get buy-in for that, and then from that we go to, okay, what changes do we need to make in the zoning regs in order to get this vision enacted? Thoughts?
Maybe just sort of talk about zoning a little bit, not to pile on, but, you know, I think one of the reasons that those properties, those hotel properties, have sort of become so dilapidated is, you know, there's a very real reputation that Stonington has for being difficult to get approvals for. I mean, I think you saw that with the Holiday Inn Express. They went through the process of the floating zone. He spent, I'm sure, no small amount of money on engineer drawings, attorneys, everything else, only to be shut down completely by the zoning commission. So, you know, it's a very real deterrent. I mean, that word gets out of, you just can't build anything there, don't even bother.
Yeah, and that's why I think we're better off if, rather than having to go piece of property by piece of property, if we could say, here's the vision and all of these, and then we come up with a sensible set of changes to the regulations, which means that you're allowed to do the same thing on any of the properties within this zone. And then hopefully we get around a little bit, this particular, because everyone can say, well, my property is unique because it's in, it's well, in that case, next to Coogan. I think it was because it was next to the open space areas. And Bill, you're more familiar with all of this than I am, so I had no idea there were big setbacks. I had no idea that it was actually difficult to redevelop those existing hotels, which reminds me a little bit of the issues we had in Pukatuck, where the zoning regulations, disincentivize people, the existing owners, from making any investment in their property because nothing is economically viable. And so while in my mind I was assuming that the best option for most people would be to knock the buildings down and start from scratch, if knocking it down and starting from scratch means they can only build on a very, very small fraction and have very restricted height limits, then there's no economic value in that either, which means we've got to find a solution for it.
Just to sort of jump in there for a second, I mean, let's not forget, that's largely hotels and restaurants. And, you're facing a real economic headwind coming off of a year-long largely shutdown or slowdown from the pandemic. So that's another real hurdle in getting capital. Capital needs two things, right? It needs opportunity and certainty. There's probably the opportunity, but capital is probably pretty tough to attract to the hospitality sector these days. If you talk to any of the local bankers, I think they'll tell you that they're not exactly rushing to throw money at hotels and restaurants. But you also need predictability, right? You need to know what the outcome of the zoning process is going to be, how long it's going to take, what's this going to cost me, and not that you're going to engage in some endless goose chase. Only at the end of it to just get a summary denial. And again, not to pile on that, but I think that's a really, you have to put yourself in a position of people that would be looking to buy these properties and do something with it. And that's sort of how they're thinking about it.
Yeah, and that's why I think we've got to think about this strategically while we think about it over the next 10 to 15 years. What can we do? So if in 5 years' time, it'll be a very different economy, then and going back to your point, I do agree, Bill, that to take away the approval risk is a very, very important thing that EDC can help do. So if people say, listen, I know I can do pretty much what I want to do and not have to ask for 5 exceptions, then I think we increase our chances of seeing this happen. But all we can do is set a framework that makes it so we logically should be good for the residents of Stonington, good for investors, and over a period of time, investors will make the decision which is in their best interest, and hopefully it's also in the town's best interest by getting increased property taxes. Okay, so to recap, I think we've got a strategic vision, goal and objective. We have a mobility / active lifestyle goal and objective. We have a aesthetic improvement, and under that we've got branding and a gateway. And then fourth, we have got I'm going to call it a car transport wayfinding objective. Is everyone sort of happy with those 4 overall goals and objectives? Okay. So now the next thing we should try to figure out is what sort of, actually, now let's do the easy thing. Can we think of an easy mission statement? So 2 or 3 sentences which sort of sums up what we want to, or actually, if it's easy, I'm going to say it'll be something like, our goal is to create a welcoming gateway to Mystic, which makes it, I suppose, aesthetically more attractive to visitors. It creates civic pride. We'd like to see if we can get more pedestrian and bike access for residents and visitors. And we'd like to increase the grand list by changing existing zoning laws, maybe I won't be quite so blunt, to incentivize redevelopment of many of the properties in this zone.
Isn't increasing the grand list really the main priority, and everything else sort of feeds that?
Yep.
Hey,
Do you think it doesn't need to be said?
Kevin, I mean, just putting the phrase though, economic development in the mission statement, you know, that promoting economic vitality maybe, and development design quality, things along that line. I think you can't understate it. This is also about, you know, increasing business, increasing the type of business, the bulk of the business, the amount of people. I think we either put economic development or economic vitality in that mission statement. Okay,
great. So I'm not smart enough to think of what the mission statement should be on this call. So how about if I draft a few sentences, I'll share with all of you. I have no qualms about any of you taking pride. I don't take any pride of authorship. So if you want to add things or get rid of things, then we'll amend that. And then hopefully by early next week, we'll have a mission statement that we're happy with.
Hey,
okay.
Kevin, yep. the first few lines you started with make a lot of sense to me. My suggestion is start with, I think you started with aesthetic, welcoming. You start with that, end a sentence, put in some of the adjectives in the second sentence, and then close with a third sentence regarding either economic vitality or growing the grand list, because ultimately that's what we want to do. And then we can obviously wordsmith or come up with different suggestions to that. Because it made sense. If it's a run-on, obviously it's not going to work. But I think if you do kind of a sentence 1, sentence 2, sentence 3, very short, I think we'd be good.
Great. Okay, and then that's a nice segue into how do we go about achieving that mission? And we've got like our four different groups. So I'm going to say that the first thing we should really focus on is coming up with a long-term vision, as Dave really talked about. And so I'm going to say we could start that almost immediately, and maybe we should say within a month or so we would. Okay, we're not McKinsey, so we're not going to spend 3 months, but I'd say we should spend a month just nailing the vision, because from the vision, many of these other things are going to flow. And then I think the other goals and objectives, all I don't think any one of them is dependent on the other ideas. But again, this is something which we're not going to spend our whole lives doing. So we're going to maybe we could think about over the next 3 or 4 months, but we'd like to get at some point, we'd like to have I think we should try to have a community meeting, Dave, and maybe we want to wait until things are opened up a little bit more.
Yeah.
I think these online ones are just tough, but I would like to see if we can get to the point of having a discussion on the vision maybe in the summer. Yeah. And then maybe by the fall, we'd like to have and obviously our goal is to get buy-in from that. I'd like to see if we could get some money to pay for, whether it's architects or landscape architects or city planners, to say, here's a bit more of a refined vision, and maybe not too radical, of what we could do, whether it's with the underpasses or with it, how do we make it more pedestrian friendly? John, I'm not aware of that, or maybe Bill mentioned there's a walking loop, but look, can we actually come up with some maps to say, if we could connect these things here, then there's a 1 mile loop or a 5 mile loop. But again, and I think some of these things may require skills that we don't have here. And I think all we're going to ask money for, Dave, is for people who have got skills to create pictures or images that help. I think, because a picture is worth 1,000 words, and that will help with the community conversation as well, to say, here's what, access to the, whether it's to the river, or here's what how we could use the cemetery, or here's how we could improve the underpass, or here's where we could put whether we put an overhead over the road walkways, or whether we do something else to have pedestrians being able to cross Coogan Boulevard safely by putting big barriers which slow traffic down.
I like the idea. So you know, we get into the chicken and egg thing about involving the public, and I sent Kevin an article, and it's provocatively called "Stop Asking the Public What They Want," something like that. So it has to do with, you know, if you ask open-ended questions, the answers won't be really be helpful or be very robust. So, you know, the thing to do, I think, is to come up, as Kevin has suggested, with, you know, a vision or options, you know, versions of visions that people can react to and say, do you like this or do you like that? And gain the public's input at that point. So I hope maybe we can follow, you know, think about that process and not get ourselves, invite the public to participate at the appropriate time such that, you know, we're abiding by all the principles for public participation, but in a way that's most productive.
Okay, that part, yeah.
And then, you know, and Sherry doesn't have to comment on this now, but we talked about it with Nancy Kauser, and we can find out more on Tuesday at our EDC meeting. But Nancy talked about an EDA highest and best use, you know, conceptual study type grant that is available. So Kevin, you mentioned getting it would fund 50 to 80%, the grant would. So that means we would have to come up with, you know, 20 to 50%. So if it's the type of thing where some of the property owners could contribute, you know, the EDC could contribute, or the town in some way can contribute to get our in-kind portion, and we could swing this grant, we could get some help there with the conceptualization aspect and the visioning part. You know, I don't know what the timeline would be, but I haven't looked into it. We can, again, Tuesday, we can get more information on the process for maybe winning a grant like that.
If I maybe jump in a little bit here, I think there's, you know, I think one of the things that was learned from that proposal to build the two hotels behind the Holiday Inn Express was, you know, it just wasn't sold to the public very well. I think you have to sell this to them, because I think there's, I'm sure I'm not telling you anything, but there is a contingent in town where you say economic development and they think more traffic, more crowded, why do we want that? So I think, you know, there's a necessity to sell it as an increase in the grand list with the least impact anywhere in town. And I, you know, not to keep harping on it, but, you know, there were these two hotels that weren't really visible, certainly from any residential property, that were far from any residents, but I think they were ultimately probably politically shot down because it abutted the nature center. But, you know, so I think we just have to be a little bit cognizant of how this is presented to the public, because I think a lot of people equate economic development with just more traffic, more bothersome tourists.
Right. So maybe that's why obviously we should say, listen, that's fine if you don't want it, but here's what the increase in your taxes is going to be, because, and oddly enough, you know, the grand list decreases every year because there's always properties and things which people can put into Avalonia or land trusts. So you're swimming against the stream to start with. But I think, again, if we get this and we can communicate and manage and push it forward, I think we're okay. I still have a little bit of a gripe that, you know, the guy with the hotels, I asked like 3 or 4 times, can we meet? Can we go through with a stack of questions? And never once would he, you know, it was always, well, you could talk to the architects, and they were never great advocates for that project.
Agreed. And that may not necessarily be the best bellwether, but, you know, I think
we've seen plenty of experience in town, Bill, where what you're saying is correct. Yeah.
Well, I think you want to kind of start with being cognitive of and sensitive to that.
No, I completely agree. So listen, I don't want to take any more of your time. So if you're okay, I will write this up into the project charter. And with our number one priority being, and I'd say within the next month, have another meeting where we'll specifically talk about a vision and then trying to figure out how do we document and agree what that vision is. So I'll work on that document. I'll send it out to all of you if you make suggestions or edits as needed, and we'll take it from there. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to say before we finish the meeting?
I'll just add, thank you very much to Bill for joining, and to Sherry and Lisa, if you're still on, thank you very much. Your input is very helpful to us. And I think, and aside from that, we're off to a great start, Kevin. So thank you for leading.
Yeah, and I think for the vision, we probably should reach out maybe to like maybe the Mystic Chamber of Commerce, maybe see if we can get Chris Regan. We didn't sort of say anything to Bill or Chris until it was almost too late, but maybe if we're going to say this is what we're going to speak on, and try to get buy-in from the people who currently own properties there. So we include, what they think they'd like to do it, over the next 10 or 15 years.
Well, just quickly to that point, not to drag this out, but I think the point you mentioned about the hotel and the difficulty in communicating, a lot of those properties are owned by people that don't live here. So that, that's a little bit of a challenge as well.
Right, it's true.
Okay, anything from anybody else?
Great job, Kevin. This is Lisa. And just want to say, like we saw in Pawcatuck with a tricky project on Cogswell Street, by engaging some of the other business owners and the residents and getting out ahead of the process with the developers, we can, the chambers, run a little interference so that it's not the big bad EDC coming in trying to shoehorn a project into a community. I mean, that's what a decent chamber of commerce is all about. And I think Dave will tell you, we were there for that project, and that was a tricky one. And I was fielding things on social media and whatever, so that you already have buy-in. We have to line up those cheerleaders and those advocates behind the scene so that we're ahead of the game.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree, Lisa. Thank you. Okay, everybody, thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Take care, guys.
Bye now.
See you later.